Delilah. Wa-da-da-da-da-da. Why, expletia. Ya-da-da-da-da-da-do. Ya-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-do. Hello, everyone. How are we doing? Right then, so let me first get rid of the cover page, which is being listed as our refuser. I please note, I do not have any faith in XSplit at all this evening. It has been playing up all day. It has been playing up all week. And basically, I think it's got worse since these components behind me have arrived, especially this. Because this is the new processor and all the other things, which motherboard, etc., which have come. And I think my laptop is basically gone, I see all this stuff. I don't need to do this anymore. You don't need to constantly subject me to running XSplit. You do not need to force me to do this thing anymore. You have something else to do this. Please. And of course, the sad reality is, sorry, computer, you'll have to do a couple more days because things haven't yet all arrived. The graphics card hasn't arrived, and Microsoft Windows hasn't arrived. And yes, I am using Microsoft Windows because I'm used to it and because I can bodge around with Microsoft Windows and it's incredibly bodgeable. And it will fit with pretty much all the university stuff I run. So, yeah, I've gone with Windows, despite me also having quite a lot of fun with Linux. Oh, well. Hello, Roland Cash. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, Calvin Gasberg. Hello, Nightsy Run. Nightsy everyone. Sometimes there is a fine line between making good points and almost sounding like a troll. And I have to say that does sound like a naval history troll. There is an argument that the RN should have been building escort carriers prior to World War II, and I have got into this in the Long Patrol, and we'll get into this in the live for this video, this subject. But I will say this now. That requires you to A, have the tonnage allowance under the Washington-London Naval Treaties, so you do not lose fleet carrier tonnage, and B, that you have Treasury finance support to do it, because there is no point in building one of these instead of building a fleet carrier. You need both. But if you can only build one, you build the fleet carrier, because that is far more useful over the full range of things and full range of tasks the Navy's asked to do. And the trouble for the Royal Navy is that the escort carrier is really only necessary as an escort carrier rather than just as an aircraft ferry, which is also what the USN originally looks at them as, in the case of fighting the Germans. Because if you're fighting the Italians, you seal the Mediterranean. And you don't have them coming out and threatening trade, so you don't need to do a convoy system. If you're fighting the Japanese, you're the other side of the world, you therefore need an aircraft ferry, much like the Americans need an aircraft ferry to get aircraft to where they need to go, where they need to be. But to fight the Germans is the only scenario where the British need an escort carrier. And even then, they did not think the need would be as great as it was, because they were, of course, not thinking that France and Norway would both fall. So you have a scenario where reasonable planning assumptions, i.e. planning that France and Norway, not planning on France and Norway falling, and the fact that it's only a 1 in 3 scenario where you need them, although you could, of course, make an argument that a Germany-Japan war, a Germany-Japan versus Britain war, you need them. Germany and Italy versus Britain war, you need them. And, of course, the combined operative thing, you need them. So you can make the case that the only scenarios you don't need them are 3 out of 7 options. That's the case you can make, but it's a tough one to get into. And, yes. It's going to be fun. And yes, Battle of Samar will probably be here, but there'll also be another battle. Hello, Vision. You've been a member for 16 months. Hello, Tenef. You've been a member for 3 months. Thank you. Members of the channel really do mean a lot to me, I have to admit, because whenever I see them in the chat, they have these icons next to their names, which I really enjoy seeing flash up because I've made all those icons. So it's entirely egotistical. It is. I will admit that to anyone who's before anyone starts commenting, going, "Oh, that's entirely ego." It is. It's entirely ego. because I made those emojis. I made those symbols. I did that in Giphy, which was fun. Hello, Michael Coach. Hello, John South, DG40. Hello, Peter Dawson. Peter Dawson, if there is a germination of an idea as a caption, are we doing horticultural agriculture? We're doing something. Hi, Amelia. Hi, stuff. Let's see. Ooh. Hi, Marga. Hi, John Voigt. My ears. Mother asks, are you drinking? Iron brew only. Johnson, for a long time I thought it was a pity Hermes had no sisters, as if they had built 5 or so sisters in the 20s. They would have had a nucleus of a great trade protection fleet. Exactly. Son of a good grief, one of these days I'm going to write you a theme tune. You didn't like my rendition of Aluetto? Hello, Escort Carriers. One most underrated ship to World War II. Yep. DH-89. Good evening, Alex. Good evening, shirt. Windows does exactly what it needs to do. Yep. Tanef. Sidolus. Evening. And runs everything that isn't specifically designed for Mac, basically. Yes. The paychecks actually haven't arrived. There's been a lot of generosity. The paychecks, I'm now told, will arrive tomorrow. So we'll cross fingers, or I will be making a personal visit to places because I currently have enough in my account to fill my petrol tank up. So I will get suited and booted, and I will go and visit their offices myself and go, "Where's my paycheck?" Which is always the last option, the option of last resort, because in my experience, academic employers do not like you turning up in their HR departments and going, "Where's my pay?" They consider that mildly aggressive, even if you have been waiting 4 months for your pay. Then, suggestion: the Irish should have ordered conversion on new build escort carriers September 1959. Prior to that, they should have been playing how they would do it, planning how they do it. You're gonna love it when you get into this discussion. Joseph, Hermes was only 500 tons over the 10,000 ton limit. A modified Hermes would have not triggered the Washington Treaty, and Hermes fought pirates. Hermes was cute. I said, why not break? Well, why not break the treaty limit on carry numbers? As no one is following the treaty, so why should we follow that? Because the moment you break the treaty, everyone else has license to break it. Everyone's breaking it within a limitation, as long as they can't be called on it. Breaking it at actual carrier numbers is a visible breaking of it. There again, I'd argue in 1937, 38, 39, it's broken. But there again, the British government are trying to keep to it because the British government don't want to spend money on defence because they want to spend money on other things. Hello, Alex. Hi, Cody85. Thank you for also being a member for 9 months. If the Argus had come into service World War I still going, would she have been useful? Yes, she'd probably been used in a strike along with Furious to attack the German base at Wilhelmshaven. Rabbit, how goes post-chicken recovery? Well, I haven't eaten all day. So that's how I'm managing to do a live this evening. I am dosed up to the eyeballs on a combination of, as recommended by a by a doctor, Buscopan and this. Always great. And I am doing this live. But if I do end up cutting it short, you know why. It's because I'm running out the door. So I haven't eaten all day. I am so expect me to be interesting. I am surviving on liquid refreshment alone, and which means everything's running through me like anything, to be quite honest. So if I disappear, you know why. Okay, I'm just putting it up at the front. Peter Dawson, better to exclude Hermes and Argus from being fleet carriers so they don't get counted towards tonnage allowance. The trouble is, it doesn't matter if you're a fleet carrier or not. You get counted towards the tonnage allowance. There's nothing in the carrier allowance which says fleet carriers. No, it's just tonnage, a carrier tonnage. That's all. Also, I'm still sniggering at the thought of Warspider arriving as part of the fleet in the Falklands and displacing some 15-inch guns. That would be interesting. What about Max and Cams? I'll be covering Max, not Cams. So no doggy-style presence in the garden midstream. No, none from me. No. Right then. So, HMS Argus, 1918 to 1944. This is the big problem with people when they start going, you know what, the escort carrier, well, it was this idea in World War II, or it was this idea. No. Most of those ideas are ideas about how to build a ship, not the concept, not developing the idea of an escort carrier, nothing like that. Why? Because of Argus. Yes, Argus comes into service in 1918. Argus is, of course, built sort of to provide fleet fighter air defense, which is interesting enough also what the first escort carriers are built to provide convoys with air defense against condors, because if you can shoot down the condors, then they don't provide information back to the submarines, so the submarines don't know where to come and kill you. It's kind of reminiscent of why you developed the SM-3 anti-ballistic missile, but also very capable anti-satellite system. Because if the satellites aren't there to spot you, no one can shoot to kill you with hypersonics and all those other super long-range weapons. It's amazing. So, yeah, this is the first fleet carrier. But then, in the interwar years, in the 1920s and 1930s, when it's used on exercises, it's used as an escort carrier to escort convoys. And they do convoy protection exercises regularly. The Royal Navy practices and drills convoy protection to the nth degree. So, they know what they need to do with it. This is the point that's worth remembering. It all comes full circle. Now, I'm going to quickly read a bit of David Hobbs. I'm not going to read as much as I read in the recorded video, but I'm going to read a little bit. And this is the point I want you to all think about. In 1936, the Admiralty interest took a more tangible form when the Director of Naval Construction, DNC, Stanley Goodall, was instructed to produce designs for potential mercantile conversions. Trade protection policy conferences in 1937 and 38 took the matter forward in principle, but in January 1939, it was decided not to proceed with ships since resources were required for other, more important services. And that is ultimately the answer to everyone's question here. The reason they don't start building earlier is because A, there's no support from outside the Navy, and B, making the case within the Navy and within the government for the resources to be allocated is very difficult. You've got the RAF arguing for more support for Bomber Command and screaming for support for Fighter Command, which they've left underfunded for the last 5 years. You've got the Navy having to recapitalize, rearm, and grow its destroyer force, its carrier force, everything. Everything is having to be grown. And fleet carriers as well as all the rest. So yeah, there's a limitation to what they can do. And the Army has become the first fully mechanized, motorized force in the world, but is also in trouble because it is the first mechanized, motorized force in the world, and the trouble is the people coming after it are using the technology, the step after it to mechanize and motorize themselves. So the British Army now needs to upgrade all its equipment. Fun. $, would you say today's helicopter carrier is a modern escort carrier? Yes and no, depending on which one you're talking about. Cody 85, what would it take to get an escort carrier clause in London treaties? Basically, instead of closing up the Japanese hole, which is 10,000 tons, you set a limit. You set a treaty limit on vessels under 10,000 tons. So basically, you go right then. You're allowed this tonnage of ships above 10,000 tons, and you're allowed this tonnage of ships below 10,000 tons. So let's say you're using 135,000 tons as the limitation for ships above 10,000 tons. Say 135,000 tons is the limitation for ships below 10,000 tons. And just watch what they build. That's what you have to do, that sort of clause. And if there had been that clause, the British would have built them like anything. So would the Japanese. Although, interestingly enough, if that clause had been in there, Japan actually being able to build them while building Yamato and Musashi could have been interesting. Whereas the British could have actually built theirs. Then in re-aircraft carriers, things don't count if they're auxiliaries, like the forward aviation maintenance ship. Ahem, cough. Yes, that is something which the British could have built on, and there is certainly an argument that HMS Unicorn is on there, and I will be talking about that in a bit. Hello, Zaski. Glenshire, that's because the IGM was planning an 8,000-ton carrier fleet, wasn't it? They were certainly pushing for that. So Argus is really a CVE, certainly as she's used by the Royal Navy in exercises and operations in the 20s and 30s. Josh Kemp, in addition, the treaty limits carrier doctrine was still very much in a state of flux until the war was well and truly on the way. That depends which service you're in, because there's the Royal Navy's carrier doctrine, which is developed using 7 different carriers, which are very different from each other mostly, and they have the Royal Navy's carrier doctrine. Let's put it this way: each nation develops their own carrier doctrine. Please don't make them. No one start thinking there's only one form of carrier doctrine. They all develop their own carrier doctrines, and the British carrier doctrine is not the American carrier doctrine. The American carrier doctrine is not the Japanese doctrine. The Japanese doctrine is not the British doctrine. And each doctrine reflects each nation's geostrategic capabilities, their own operational mindset, and the type of aircraft and carriers they're using. You do not operate a British carrier the same way you operate an American carrier to get its maximum effectiveness, and vice versa. And it's the same with Japanese carrier. So there is not one way, and there's not even one way of being the best way, because what's the best way for the American fleet to operate in the middle of the Pacific is not the best way for the British to operate in the middle of the Mediterranean, is not the best way for even the British to operate in the Pacific, because the British are planning on an operation of coming in the Pacific and coming from the South China Sea up. That's their war against Japan plan. The Americans are planning on going across the Pacific. The British are planning on fighting the Mediterranean and fighting in the North Atlantic. The Americans are planning on fighting in the North Atlantic. They're not really fighting, they're concentrating on fighting in the Mediterranean. So the balance of your force is going to be different. So carriers and anti-submarine warfare in the 1920s reflects this. And development of naval aviation in this period reflects this, and the strategic idea behind it reflects this. What you start to realize very quickly when you start to look into this and look into the idea of the escort carrier is there is a lot of ideas going around about there being an escort carrier, but there are people like, I don't know, the Board of Trade, who had little enthusiasm for conversion of merchant ships to fulfill roles for which they had not been intended, mainly because the Board of Trade was worried about losing very valuable merchant ships which would be moving trade and profit. Yes, but of course you might lose them if they're not escorted properly, and then you could lose a lot more, couldn't you? But trying to get people to understand the concept of spending money to save money is always a difficult one. Hello, Verdun. Colin Cameron, Doc, would equipping Hurricane or float plane launchers with added depth charges on the aircraft have been used less resourceful, less versatile? No. Well, I need to switch my work schedule to British Standard at the summertime. Laptop audio going. Shouldn't be going too bad. It should be working. It is this. I have to admit, I've been annoyed with Amazon and getting the new camera microphone set up for the new computer because It's been cancelled on me 3 times, so I will work that one out. Mitchell, I would say the old British Invincible class carriers were pre the Queen Elizabeth class were modern escort carriers. I'd say there's an interesting point as whether they're escort carriers or light carriers. I would go light carriers more than escort carriers, mainly because of their role capability and the fact they could do the escort operation and the light operation at the same time. An escort carrier could only carry. Also, there's the number of aircraft they could carry. They could carry, remember, the escort carriers, the Queen Invincible class could carry 18 Sea Harriers and 24 Sea Kings, which is about 42 aircraft. Most escort carriers were talking 8 to 12 aircraft. So really, the Invincible class are in the light carrier range. Cameron, would you consider sea control ships such as Prince of the Ostras more than Swan CVE? More towards light carrier than CVE. Hey, Christopher Ryan. My coach. Read different national doctrines. How well badly would the different doctrines have worked in different theories? I.e., IGN doctrine in the Med, USN doctrine in Atlantic, are in the Pacific. USN in the Atlantic would have been okay. USN doctrine in the Mediterranean would have been a nightmare. You always have to remember that the British are fighting battles in the Mediterranean which last days, weeks. The Americans are built up to fight a battle where they would surge the aircraft, boom, boom, boom. It would be a fight over a couple of hours, and then everyone would go home. And that makes sense. That's why you do the big strike. That's why you do the Alpha strike, because you hit them and you take out the fleet. Whereas if you're fighting in Mediterranean, you don't have a fleet to go and fight often. You are literally going along, keeping up consistent operations, dealing with enemy submarine threats, dealing with keeping a constant presence to deal with enemy surface threats, which might come in, and dealing with air defense threats. It's a different type of operation. And neither one's good worse for that, because if you took the British one to the Pacific, you don't have a stronger Alpha strike. Yes, the British would probably offer it, differentiate off that by attacking at night to maximize the capability of their strike. But the British would have to fight the Pacific in a very different way to the Americans. Would it be less effective or more effective? It depends on your perspective, and it depends on the outcomes. And honestly, it's half a dozen, 1/6 of the other, to my mind, in the Pacific. As IJN doctrine in the Mediterranean, they would have run out of pilots very early on, and it would have worn them out in weeks rather than years. David Hobbs' book is Royal Navy Escort Carriers. Amir Barra, if you convert Lancaster class cruiser, I'm not giving that any support. They were not that. They were cruisers, super cruisers, heavy cruisers, but not that. CV or CV? CV. They're massive. Not even CVL, Dan. Probably the Americans turn light cruisers into CVLs. Alaska class would be CVs. Actually, how many fighters would you need for Convoy Escort Cap? Well, the idea was you needed at least 18 for a cap, but most escort carriers carried 6 to 8, because they didn't actually fly a cap. They launched when radar detected a Condor coming into range. As a modular aircraft, I think if the RN had escort carriers earlier, the SKU would have found a great niche and would have had a much better reputation. Yep. Vision cruisers in the 1920s and 30s had big air components with hangars and multiple aircraft and bucks, so a bit of escort carrying a mission. You had a few seaplane cruisers too. For Battle of Midway, the aircraft the IGN cruisers did the scouting mission. True. So, as we said, anti-submarine warfare in the 1920s, it's interesting. It's all mostly dependent upon the Free F. And you also have to remember what you're dealing with in terms of submarines. This is the point. The submarines you're dealing with in the 1920s, even if you're dealing with World War One, and for most of World War Two, would be more accurately described in today's terminology as submersibles rather than submarines. They go everywhere on the surface. Why do they do that? Because they are faster. They can't go that long a time underwater, and they don't have that much air. They don't have that much battery power. They need to charge those batteries. So most of the time they are on the surface, which also explains their hydrodynamics and their shaping for their operation at sea. So this is the important thing to remember. Submarines have to spend their time on the surface. All an aircraft therefore has to find to neutralize a submarine is to spot it on the surface and make it submerge itself. And if it can damage it, even better, which is where the 100-pound anti-submarine bombs come in, which, as I'm always telling people, are not really that good or that useful. But any damage you do to a submarine is going to start causing them some paranoia. It's psychological warfare. And they're not going to want to stay down too long. And a submarine which is on the surface and damaged is a submarine which is dead. Because it can't dive. And if it can't dive, it's got to try and get home on its surface. And a submarine is basically has a similar problem as the surface radar. Especially if it's operating in the Atlantic and it's German. And in that war, it's operating far away from home. Now, you also have to remember what other types of war the British are thinking about in the 1920s and 30s. They're thinking about, in the 1920s, war in the Far East. The biggest threat is Japan. That's the big threat. So that's what they're looking at. And that would be a war to attack to go for the Japanese. So you've got two things. You've got ASDIC, which is made by the Anti-Submarine Investigations, committee, a name for the Anti-Submarine Investigations Committee. And you've got aircraft. And the idea is the aircraft would make sure they stuck their heads down and they were marked in location, and the ASDIC destroyers, etc., would come up blasting away. Bang, bing, 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 bing. Hello, there you are. Bye-bye, depth charges. And the submarine would be just there. Because the submarine can barely move underwater, especially if there's a deep current, if there's a strong current. So this is what they're thinking about. So HMS Hermes comes along. And Hermes is pretty darn cool. Hermes could have been another escort carrier. As people pointed out, she's 500 tons too heavy to be underneath the Washington Treaty. And trust me, the Royal Navy is upset by that. Because if the Royal Navy had managed to get her in at 500 tons lighter, and they did look at it, and basically, I'm fairly certain if they managed welding rather than riveting, they would have saved the 500 tons, or at least close enough they would have been able to lie about it. They could well have done what was suggested earlier and build an entire squadron of Hermes. In which case, you probably would have had a London Treaty, which would have recognised the 10,000-ton escort carrier. Or probably they would have become the light carriers. Now, what would that mean for history? It might mean no HMS Unicorn, which could be interesting from the light fleet carrier perspective, because these vessels could have been called upon to do it. Which would mean they're not available to do the escort work as you would think of them. But it could also mean there's a lot more of them in service by the time war comes along, and Britain has a lot more carrier construction experience. Either way, it would have been interesting. Also, could have been interesting to see what the Americans would have responded with, because let's be honest, what the American 10,000-ton carrier being. Considering what the Americans built when they were trying to build a light carrier, it could have been fairly interesting. Dan Freeman, I thought the reason the Oscars were not chosen for conversion to carriers was because the hull shape meant that they would have been a relatively small air group. There was certainly that argument put forward by some people in the US Navy. I myself do not agree with that argument, and I don't think anyone who's a serious naval architect would agree with that argument. Principally because I'm trying to turn my lights on. Oh, lights go on. Boom, boom. No, lights go on. Principally because a ship which is that long and which you're prepared to stick a carrier stuff on top of it is probably going to be fine. Lights are on. I fancied happy lights. It's big enough you can, and also you have to remember you would build up from the main deck up, so you would build a hangar, flight deck, etc. You would have to route the exhaust gases, etc. But you could do it all. It would cost a lot of it, and also there were people in the US who really wanted those Alaskas built as Alaskas. And saying they have poorer torpedo defense than an Essex is a bit. Again, have a look at the actual Alaska design and actual torpedo defense, and yeah, I'm not sure I'd say they're poorer defense than the Essexes. They actually have quite good defense. But either way, Alaskas are not escort carriers, which aren't today's topic of the conversation. So yeah, Hermes comes in and again is another vessel which is used a lot for escort carrier role in convoy in exercises. She does a lot of other missions as well. One of the things I think interesting about her, of course, is she has got the centerline lifts, and her lifts are actually quite big. Marcus Franconian, would building merchant aircraft carriers or have plans and designs ready during the 1930s, as it would have been a great way to get around treaties, transport aircraft on cargo ships. Yeah, as mentioned earlier at the beginning, they had plans for escort carriers in 1936. They had plans for other conversions earlier. Though it's also, and keep courageous because not hunting subs. Yes, in fact, the other thing you could have done, of course, if you had a lot of these ships, is they probably get faster. And you might have had them operating with aircraft, if you consider HMS Hermes, right? So Hermes in World War II usually carried an air group of 20 aircraft. Now, if her 20 aircraft are mostly anti-submarine, are oriented around the anti-submarine warfare of the group, they might carry 12 Swordfish, 8 air defense fighters at best, or they might have been carrying entirely skewers, which would have been interesting to see if it had been possible. I don't think they ever really used a skewer from Hermes because she wasn't fast enough. She was only capable of top speed of 25 knots. But there again, if you built a slightly more powerful version with the engines you could have got later on, you could have got higher than 25 knots. But leaving that to one side, she could have been the anti-submarine warfare carrier of Force H. So Force H would have had maybe Ark Royal and a Hermes. That is from Drax Video on Alaska. I know that's from Drax Video on Alaska. I know Drax said that. Doesn't mean he and I are very good friends. As the Canadian Naval History team will tell you, when all of us, we do not always agree. And I'm not sure why you're producing one CVL versus two CVs. I don't know why that's where that's coming up at all. I don't know. Don't know. Our center line is more vulnerable to dive bomber damage than side lifts. Theoretically, if the bomb actually hits them. But again, it's getting the bomb to actually hit them that's the problem. Adrian Hosho is an escort carrier size ship and becomes basically used as an escort carrier during World War II. Sam Johnson, did they ever look at a town class conversion? Nope. They needed a town class for other jobs. Don't even place 2 historians in a room. Expect at least 5 opinions. Yep. Rob Smith, given Hermes' nickname, would a class of Hermes carriers be described as a rash? Something, definitely. It would depend on what names they chose for the rest. Can escort carriers be used as helicopter carriers for anti-submarine warfare? Yes. What if some enterprising rich person bought the battlecruisers meant to be scrapped and converted them to carriers to escort ships during war? Would this need to happen before the Washington Naval Treaty? Yeah, but it would be interesting legality-wise. Yeah. Right, so carriers and anti-submarine warfare in the 1930s. It starts to get more, and they start to look at actually carrying proper depth charges, etc., especially from larger aircraft. But again, it's still the case of making the submarine duck down. Sinking a submarine is a lovely bonus, but it's not the big thing. Again, I would use this example whenever I'm asked this question, because people often focus on the stats of sinking submarines, and I go, let's say you're a convoy commodore, and you arrive at Western Approaches Command to talk to the admiral in charge in Western Approaches. Max Horton is one for a large chunk of the war. Okay, so you go to Admiral Horton and you go, Sir! Yes, report. I lost 60 merchant vessels, my entire convoy, but I sank 30 submarines. Is he going to be happy with you? Now let's reverse it. Sir, all 60 merchant vessels have arrived. I didn't sink a single submarine. Which scenario is he going to be happy in? Convoy war, anti-submarine warfare is one of those areas of warfare where killing your enemy is great, but it often isn't actually the goal. It's the same with dealing with submarines when you're a fleet operation. The submarine is kind of a mobile minefield at this point, which is supposed to prevent you accomplishing your aim as much as it is meant to kill you. If you still accomplish your aim, then it's not having the effect. Aaron Contreras, I heard the reason the Independence class carriers came in existence is due to lack of guns to equip all the Klingons at the time the conversion started. Any truth to this? Not 100% true. They could have built the guns, but it was fairly useful to turn them into carriers. Good. I think if a private citizen had the resources and connections to acquire the hull of a CV, they'd suddenly find no one was willing to sell them aviation gas, aircraft spares, marine diesel. Yeah. it's fun. Sure, killing the enemy is almost always secondary to the actual objective. That's why surrenders are still victories. So I think I sank no subs and lost my whole convoy, plus several behind me. Well, at least I made it through because that would be guaranteed no re-employment. Yeah, governments can be very persuasive when they need to be. So the trouble is for anti-submarine warfare, and especially in this 1930s, is most of the knowledge is coming from World War I experience, which by this point is over a decade ago, soon to be 20 years ago. And from exercises. And the trouble is with exercises is this. As I've explained in exercise before, there's like the air defense exercise. If I just quickly do this, I can explain. So, one of the things that happens in when we're talking about naval guns, etc., in World War II, lots of people talk about the British and go, well, their guns couldn't do AA. They could do AA, but they could do low angle. So let's say it's here. This is the gun. And hang on, let's fly to this is the gun here, and this is the aircraft flying along. This level, it's only a low angle to engage. Because this aircraft is going to attack the capital ship, not me, the destroyer, so I don't need a high angle gun. It's only when the aircraft is goes and starts going along that I need higher hanger. Oh, good lord, it's over me, and that's when you have the problem. If you're attacking fleets with level bombing aircraft, i.e. heavy bombers, you're not going to waste a stick of bombs trying to drop them on a destroyer. It's going to be dodging too much. It's going to be, etc. So you design your guns appropriately. It's only as you get to the later 1930s when the British are developing the dual-purpose 4.5 inch that they're going, hang on, we think we've been lied to. And they start changing things, because it's not going to be a strategic bombers. It's not going to... Also, by the way, low angle will deal with a torpedo bomber coming in. It's only dive bombers which are the problem. And that's what they need to sort of... The high angle guns are needed for, really. Torpedo bombers, by the time they're at the high angle range, they've dropped their torpedo and they're going away, and you're now concentrating on a torpedo more than them. And this is a sort of the scenario, but it comes through in exercises, because in exercises, what are people concentrating on? They want to get the high-value kill, and the high-value kill is the capital ship, it's the carrier, it's the cool, sexy thing. So, this is the problem when you're talking about anti-submarine warfare, because in 1920s, 1930s, if a submarine can't kill a capital ship, it will try and either do risky behavior to get to it, or it will hold itself back to survive. In wartime, they'll put a torpedo through a destroyer. They don't care. They want to kill and they want to get out of there, preferably in one piece. So it's like the point of air defense is not to shoot down the enemy aircraft, but to prevent them from successfully attacking you. Shooting them down is a bonus. Yes, that is the other point with the air defense guns. They're not there to shoot down aircraft. They're there to deter aircraft and make their jobs harder. Sikorskis could haul depth charges. But the trouble is they're not really developed enough before World War II. Thanks, Mike. That's right. One thing I was wondering about the British carriers have the designation R for carriers instead of CV. Yes. That's how we like it. I don't think so, to be honest. By the time they had enough lift to spare, we're heading towards the 60s. No, what with the early helicopters, they could carry the lighter depth charges, and they could carry those. The thing is, they couldn't give you much loitering time. The thing is about early helicopters is they're just not that useful for loitering. They can get up. It takes a while to develop engines which have the right power to weight ratio, have the right positioning, and give you the right amount of lift, also for the right amount of fuel. It's like everything. The idea is working long before it's actually a practical idea. Jonathan, for the new, I'm presuming Hearts of Iron expansion 4, you can make a medium-range fighter diver that can carry a torpedo. I built 15 Hermes class by 1940, all armed with 20 on my medium-range plane. It was devastating, although it needs a lot of oil. Most dangerous aircraft surface ships in early World War II, 2 years, the Swordfish. Also, most dangerous aircraft are submarines for World War II, mainly because rockets. They were fitted with an anti-surface radar, which would spot a submarine on the surface a long way away, but also could spot periscopes. They carried depth charges to drop on the periscopes. They carried rockets to fire at the surfaced submarines. So the surface submarine would get 8 rockets coming in on it, or in this case, could get 24 rockets coming in on it. And the thing is, you don't need to do that much damage to really make a submarine's day bad. You need to damage the pressure hull. Okay? But what do I mean by damage the pressure hull? Well, if you damage the outer hull and its ability to retain water, you can affect its ability to dive. You damage the pressure hull, you stop them being able to dive completely. There are parts on the submarine where the pressure hull is surprisingly close to the outer hull and surprisingly able to be attacked, especially on submarines which are saddlebag tank designs. This means you do a little damage, they ain't going anywhere. If they ain't going anywhere, they either have to stay on the surface, in which case the nearest escort can come along and go, "Hello, Mr. Submarine!" Yes, there is the problem of its torpedoes, potentially, but again, the escort can fire its guns from quite a significant distance away, possibly out of the range of the torpedoes, and can also, and this is the important thing, choose which angle it comes to attack from. A damaged submarine on the surface may not be able to turn around that quickly. However, I know Japan was building autogyros for CVL, CV. There were lots of people building autogyros, and they were getting better. But again, not they were they're being used for spotting, not really for actual anti-submarine warfare. And the American radial pistol engine was inadequate for ASW loitering. It wasn't adequate for what they needed it for in terms of anti-submarine warfare loitering. You're talking about something which, in terms, especially as also, let's put it this way. If I'm using a helicopter for loitering in this period, what do I also need to develop for it? Well, I need, if it's loitering, I need some form of sonar to drop down, a dipping sonar, preferably to make use of the submarine for a helicopter. I also need it, otherwise it's carrying a radar. If it's carrying the same radar as a swordfish, which is going to cover more territory in the same amount of time, the swordfish or the helicopter? Which is going to be more fuel efficient, the swordfish or the helicopter? Which is going to be more reliable, the swordfish or the helicopter? Which is more worthwhile me investing 3 people, the money, the time, etc., all I'm going to have to train to get it work? If it had been a helicopter, trust me, they would have built the helicopter. All right then. Yes. Right, so the ASV Mark II is the one I'm going to give you the details of, because you've asked me, Dan Verka, what was the size of centimetric radar that sort of swordfish and how heavy? The ASV Mark II is the most common one. It was introduced in 1940 in the UK. It was a sea surface search. There were 24,600 sets built, roughly. It had a frequency of 176 megahertz. PRF of 400 PPS, which I'm trying to remember what PRF. I said it and then PRF, I forgot. Pulse repetition frequency, of course. Brain off. It had a beam width of 150 degrees, roughly. Pulse width of 2.6 US. Range of between 1 and 40 miles. Precision, give or take 5 degrees. And power 7 kilowatts. The Mark 1 had come in, of course, before it. And, well, yeah, it's an interesting system, especially when combined with things like the ley light and other systems which were used. But broadly speaking, what was its weight? Depends on its installation, its weight. I'm looking up the various options for its weight. Sorry, I haven't organized my notes in a long, long time on this subject, because I haven't done anti-submarine radars since my PhD thesis, probably. I think it's between I think it's roughly 1.25 meter wavelength. I'm not sure. That's the first time I've seen a wavelength listed, and that's 1.25 meters, but that's from 1937, which is a few years too early. The ASV-1 had a nominal wavelength of 1.5 meters. I think it's roughly between 1.25 and 1.5 meters, but I'm not 100% certain. So please don't quote me on it. And here, of course, is HMS Unicorn, which was ordered in 1939. Now, I've already mentioned earlier that the Royal Navy really would have liked to have been ordering escort carriers from 1936 onwards. That's when they're starting to look at them. They're looking at escort carriers in 1936. They're preparing actual designs in 1936. But the thing is, if you're given the funding and you can only build one thing or the other, you build the fleet carrier. When they do get some extra funding, they go to a forward aviation support ship. Why? Because if you have a choice between Unicorn or an escort carrier, you build Unicorn. She's more useful. She is also the prototype for the light fleet carrier. And the Unicorn is really quite darn useful. But again, she's ordered in 1939, and one of the things that's always worthwhile remembering is that the 10-year rule ends officially in 1932, which would suggest wars are expected in 1942 or afterwards. Unofficially, the Treasury managed to enforce it till 1937, which would say wars not expected till 1947 or afterwards. In which case, if you were going to be building sloops and small fleet carriers, now I would have always argue, of course, that you should have kept the sloop program going throughout World War and the interwar years. You should have had an Empire sloop program running every year, procuring 24 sloops across Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa and India, and just constantly have these sloops entering service. Maybe on a 2-1-1-1-1 basis, where Britain's buying 2 for everyone else buying 1, or something like that. You should have had that for anti-submarine warfare. Escort carriers, I think, should have been built. I do agree, and obviously the Royal Navy agrees. But the Royal Navy only has so many resources and so much funding, and so if they have the choice, they put the money into this because it's better. Escort, also remember a submarine on surface is a slow surface command and very vulnerable to being raked with smaller caliber guns. Yep. Colin Aaron, were hedgehogs inspired by someone watching anti-aircraft dropping a small depth charges, or as the apocryphal story, or is that an apocryphal story? That's a sort of an apocryphal story. They started working on hedgehogs a lot earlier than they started seeing aircraft dropping a small stack of depth charges. And you have to remember the hedgehog is an anti-submarine mortar, and the charges are the smaller variation of charges. They're not the actual proper depth charges. It's the squid which brings in depth charges. That's different. Swordfish, and they don't have dipping sonar in the 1950s today, so I guess the Ghana makes more sense. Yep. Why do I suspect the answer to the question is still Swordfish frozen replacement for Merlin anti-submarine warfare helicopter today? No, you now have dipping sonar, and Swordfish can't fly slow enough for that. I was trying to think. I could totally see the RN launching a Swordfish on patrol on April Fool's Day. I have done the maths. Outside of a few other people I know, you could probably launch a Swordfish from the deck of Queen Elizabeth or Prince of Wales. Just saying. Just putting that out into the ether. You could. If anyone wants to do, I don't know, 80 years since the Battle Atlantic or something like that, memorial, end of the Battle Atlantic, and you could launch a Swordfish from a Queen Elizabeth class carrier. It doesn't. The Swordfish Mark III had a centimetric radar under its fuselage and couldn't carry a torpedo. Nope. But that was okay for it because, well, it still had the radar. It was by that point it was more for the anti-submarine role, wasn't it? No, I'm not inserting ads. Go away. Mm-hmm. Ren. Just fixing something. So, convoy doctrine. Now, this is where things get interesting, because the Royal Navy has a convoy doctrine in World War II, which they didn't have in World War One. They also have an anti-submarine warfare doctrine, which involves going out and hunting submarines. Now, here is the problem for the Royal Navy. Again, it goes back to that war scenario again of which nation are we going to be fighting? Because for a convoy doctrine, you need 2 things. You need escorts and you need air superiority. That is the British doctrine, right? Now, for the British, air superiority had supposed to be a local thing that you were needed within range of basically long-range maritime patrol aircraft. And when the Admiralty does get operational control over Coastal Command, life does get a lot easier. For starters, Coastal Command don't keep finding their aircraft being nicked to go and do something else. But what very quickly becomes apparent is losing Norway, losing France changes the anti-submarine warfare game. I was making this point a lot in the Fall of France video from last week, which is why these two fitted together quite well. I was quite happy they won in that scenario. Because the convoy doctrine, which existed prior to World War II, and prior to the scenario of France falling and Norway falling as it exists, is quite simple. Surround the convoy, group as many ships as you dare together in a convoy. Surround that convoy with as many escorts as you can. Route that convoy south. Bring it through the Azores, etc., south, far away from where enemy submarines could get to it. Then bring it up the coast of France, where it would have long-range air patrol protection from France, all the way up to where it gets air protection from Cornwall, and into the Irish Sea and into the Channel. The Channel would, of course, have a barrier at one end, which would block any enemy forces coming down it, a patrolled and maintained barrier like they'd built in World War One. And therefore the merchant vessels could easily get to all the south coast ports and all the ports in the Irish Sea, and then you would have to do convoys up the coast of England. And whether the convoys would go around Scotland or go up come up through the Channel barrier would be up to which they thought was best from an air support perspective. That's the plan. But as we all know, there are 3 modes for God and Fate. 1, they give you nothing you want. 2, they give you everything you want. 3, they give you everything you want and then they take it away, forcing you to completely rebuild everything from scratch. This was a case of Occasion 3. So, convoy doctrine has to adjust. And one of the things you have to start rapidly working out is, where is that air support going to come from? Because the big air support problem, when you're first starting out, as I said, is not anti-submarine warfare air support. It's taking out the Condors. The Condors are the things which are finding the enemy convoys, finding the Allied convoys for the Germans. And that's a big problem to deal with. And if you consider the Cold War doctrine, the issues for the Allies when you're dealing with that, etc., in a NATO Cold War scenario, the big problem for the convoys, any convoys coming across the Atlantic to reinforce Europe, and reforge or anything like that, it's the bears. Because the Blackjacks, all the other strike aircraft, even the submarines, can't search the same volume of ocean and stay able to search it a long time as the bears. Once you have satellites, that's great. But satellites are able to be predicted in their movement, and you can work your way going around them. You can be steaming in a completely different direction when the satellite goes overhead, and then change course immediately it's gone. And yes, navies do that. They did all sorts of things. Electronic jamming, smoke pots, everything to try and confuse satellites. So in the end, it's going to be a bear. And that's going to provide you with up-to-date targeting, up to the minute, in many ways, targeting information. Sometimes from beyond the horizon by just peeking out the electronic emissions. And going, I can see an AWACS there, and I can see an AWACS there, so I reckon the enemy fleet is going to be there. Condor does much the same thing, but there's no satellites in that world. The Condor is going out and spies the convoy. The Condor doesn't need to attack the convoy itself. It can do. The Condor can go for the convoy. It can take the risk and go and attack the convoy itself, but it doesn't need to. It just needs to get on the radio and hammer away. Enemy convoy spotted here. Da, 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 da. These are its coordinates. These is its position. And I will keep pace, keep reporting and updating its position so you can refine. And the more information and data you get of that convoy movements, the easier it is to focus in the wolf pack. The easier it becomes. So that's your problem. How do you deal with that? Wayne's World of Science Technology. Do any working swordfish exist? Yes. There are about 3 of them. Why are you not receiving enough video to maintain it? I have no idea why. It's not dropping any frames. It's broadcasting at that. Okay. Okay. All right. Charles Funk, wondering about building merchant ships with an ITCVE conversion, akin to Orcs merchant cruisers. It would have been certainly sensible, but again, doing it was something they could. I would have done it as part of the merchant cruiser program, but they didn't push for it. Because again, it costs money, and it looks warlike. Then AS3 looks like the set the Swordfish use. Seems to be the first to use the cavity magnetron, which would allow it to spot a periscope or snorkel. That was certainly the later version. I mean, no condors, no subs equals safe convoys. So the two 142 Bears and the L-38 Mays were a greater threat. Yeah. Not because of what they kill themselves, but what they bring in. It's kind of like when you're dealing with reconnaissance and artillery assets on the battlefield today, on the ground war. If you take out the reconnaissance teams, so the artillery targeting teams, that stops the artillery being able to engage. And if you stop the artillery being able to engage, you tend to win a war. Because artillery is the big killer on the battlefield. Yep, there is a reason the Russians are still running around with bears. Can't send that missile swarm you talk up if you don't have a target. Colin Cameron, Doc, did the anniversary flight, I could see some RN officer going, the loiter time is what? Can we fit an air radar on it and use it as instead of the Merlins? Oh. Just in that respect, the Catalina has a run for most dangerous aircraft for ships. Oh, yeah, the Catalina's good. Robert Smith, when you get excited, your audio breaks up. Then takes a few seconds to calm back and get normal. As said, it's playing up a bit today. I do apologize. What matters is model technology. What matters is 1, detection range, 2, weapons range, 3, weapons kill capability. Same things that always mattered. Yep. Marcus Fransonian. Is it kind of sad that the merchant marine and fishing vessels turn auxiliary minesweepers and escorts have so little recognition as they did win the war for the Allies in more ways than one? Yeah, it is sad. That would have been the sensible thing to have stopped worrying about what looked like warlike and actually worried about having the war-built capabilities. But yes, unfortunately, the world didn't work out that way. British politicians have always been interesting. British politicians have always been very, very interesting. Oh, goodness gracious me, we know that to this day. British politicians are incredibly interesting. I have to be. I'm trying to be slightly more polite than I can be because, well, sometimes British politics is very interesting, and sometimes you look at it and go, why? And sometimes people are making political points over stuff, and you sit there and go, but we all know that's not the case. You're making political points because that sounds good, but you know the reality of behind that and the reasons why they've done this. What you should be attacking is this, this, and this, but you're not going to attack that because that's complicated. And God knows, politicians don't think the public can deal with complicated. Sorry. My phone just beeped me and went, I have no power. And I went, ouch. Ouch indeed. And then there was a message also on my phone from XSplit going, do you know you are broadcasting live? Yes. I do. Alright then, so merchant aircraft carriers, aka MAX ships. So the vast majority of these do not have hangars, okay? And the difference between them and escort carriers is very simple. Escort carriers are actually our aircraft carriers. They are converted. Whereas MAX ships are merchant ships which have had an escort carrier to an extent built on top of them. Now, the first generation, these are the new build grain carriers, and the first ones to test it really were 8,000 tons in deep load, 12 knots capable, 4 aircraft carried. They did have a lift, and ended service April 1943 to March 1944. Operated by the Haynes Steamship Company, except Empire McAlpine and Empire McKendrick, which were operated by the Ben Line steamers. Now, this is one of those interesting things where there are various rumors of who came up with this idea, and whether or not the guy who actually owned the Haynes Steamship Company, the managing director, came up with the idea. Interesting enough, he came up with the idea in a meeting with several naval officers. And as part of the idea, because of course he came up with the idea, he volunteered his ships to be the first to have it, to be changed into it. So we can all discuss whether we think that that was some naval officers used to and trained with the idea of managing up as well as downwards, carefully steering the conversation so a very nice gentleman had an idea and then offered his ships to do it. Because they were fed up with arguing the Board of Trade about doing it. Because it's interesting enough is, yes, these are 8,000 tons. And then if we look at the, from 1936, the plans, they included, the designs, the Winchester Castle, a ship of 20,000 tons, 631 feet, that's 192.33 meters, long, and Wapiar, a smaller ship of 12,500 tons, or 516 feet, and 157.28 meters long. Now, interestingly enough, there is another design which goes around at this point, which is not named for what ship it's for, but that ship is roughly 8,000 tons. These were armed with single 4-inch guns, 2 single 40mm guns, and 4 single 20mm Oricon cannons. Now, why do I say this is not a rash wartime conversion? Why do I not think this is a pre-war plan? Because they come with a hangar and a lift. If you've already taken the time to work out how to install the hangar and lift and where they're going to go, that's a more serious conversion than what comes next in the MAX ships, isn't it? Single 4-inch gun, 2 single 40mm guns, 4 single 20mm Oricons. Now, well. Then we have HMS Audacity, which is officially the first escort carrier built. Now, Audacity is cute. Audacity is audacious. Audacity's air group are entirely martlets. Audacity doesn't carry a single swordfish. Her entire air group are martlets. From 802 Squadron, she carries 8. She has no hangar. She can store 8 aircraft as long as she's operating only 6 at a time. She carries a 4-inch gun, a 6-inch gun. A 4-inch gun and a 6-pounder gun, sorry. 4 2-pounder anti-aircraft guns, aka 40mm pom-poms, and 4 20mm guns. Now, here is her life in 1940. In the 7th of March 1940, the SMS, SMS, is it? I'm not sure. The Hanover, which is a German vessel, is captured. She is then, after she's captured, towed to Jamaica. She's then renamed Sinbad. Her port of registry is changed to Kingston, Jamaica, under a British flag. Her cargo, including the 29 barrels of pickled sheep pelts, are offered for sale by tender. 29 barrels of pickled sheep pelts. All imagine what you use pickled sheep pelts for. Trust me, if you actually go Google it, what you use them for is far stranger than you can possibly imagine. Okay. Sinbad is then declared as after achievement declared a prize, is so then changed the name to Empire Audacity, as she becomes one of the Empire ships of the Ministry of War's transport fleet, and commissioned as an ocean boarding vessel. Her port of registry is therefore changed to London, and she's placed under management of Cunard. In January 1941, she's sent to Blythe Dry Docks and Shipbuilding Company, where she's rebuilt as an escort carrier. Now, this means that she's commissioned in the 17th of June 1941 as an escort carrier, the first escort carrier. She has her name changed after working up trials, etc., on the 31st of July 1941 to HMS Audacity. She's no longer Empire Audacity. So, in a very short time, she's been through 4 names. Well, 2, 4. Yeah, and she's now on her 5th as HMS Audacity. Technically, transferring from Empire Audacity to HMS Audacity isn't really a full name change, so we'll discount that one. But, yeah, she's on her 4th name. Now, she will take part in 4 convoys before she sunk in December 1941. Fun times. The naval officers in the said meeting, it'd be very noble and patriotic of a shipping line owner to donate their ships and merchant aircraft carrier. Oh, you'd like to help? No, he had the idea, remember? It must have been, we have a problem finding enough aircraft to escort convoys. It's just that we cannot get carriers fast enough. Oh, no. I've had a cunning idea. You can just imagine him sitting there thinking, I've had a cunning idea. Why don't we use convert merchant ships? And all naval officers going, oh, thank God, it only took 6 glasses of port and free courses to get him there. Oh, good Lord. No, I see. Gimbal manufacturer. Dan Freeman goes straight to Google for pickled sheep pelts. Merchant Navy taking and selling everything not nailed down and then getting the bolt cutters? Must be a Thursday. It's fun. But anyway, I have to admit, she was reconstructed in Blythe, and the citizens of Blythe did wonder why the superstructure of a perfectly good ship was being scrapped at a time when Britain was definitely short of ships. But, it survives. Now, she takes part in 4 convoys before she sunk. Her first convoy, well, as said, she's loaded with only fighters, but she is on the Gibraltar convoy run. So she's going through the Bay of Biscay. They have plenty of anti-submarine escorts. The trouble is when they're spotted by condors, the submarines don't have to have far to frigging go. So, yeah, you need to take out those condors. There's OG-74, which sails from Britain on the 30th of September 1941. It was attacked on the 21st of September by a Condor. The bombs struck the Walmer Castle, a convoy rescue ship. By the way, Castle, yes, it's named. It's a similar vessel to the vessel which they were looking at converting. A fighter from Audacity shot down the bomber. Walmer Castle damage was extensive, so she had to be sunk by an escorting corvette. Then she takes part in HG-74, which is the return from Gibraltar to Clyde. She arrives there on the 17th of October. It was an uneventful trip. So basically, she's doing 2-week trips. Again, please note, this is one of the interesting things when the US starts to, when the British are taking their escort carriers into service from Americans. And the Americans have put in all these facilities to operate far away in the Pacific, on the long way from support and all this stuff that they might need for doing that. And the British basically take that all out to put other stuff in. Because they're going, well, we don't need that. We're not going to be operating for weeks or months on end. We're going to be operating on 2-week, 3-week runs. Nice way. You don't need that for a 3-week operation at sea. Right. If we go back to it. Then we have... Sorry, I get distracted by the chat occasionally catching up. There's some funny stuff going on there. Then we have OG-76. This, of course, has Eric Winkle Brown aboard. And it's where he achieves his first victory. And it's also where the commanders from Audacity shoot down 4 Condors. Now, unfortunately, she then achieves something which only one other carrier has achieved at this point. Well, technically 2. Illustrious didn't get it named, though, by the Kriegsmarine's headquarters. She didn't get, Illustrious was just a local priority target. Only Ark Royal and Audacity have ever been singled out by the headquarters of the German Navy as needing to be sunk. Now, on her return, she only had 4 martlets serviceable out of 8, which is actually not that bad when you consider it. They came under attack from 12 U-boats. The martlets managed to shoot down 2 Condors and attack U-131. 131 shot down a martlet, but was unable to dive after the attack because the damage they'd done to the pressure hull meant they couldn't, so they had to scuttle her, and the crew were taken prisoner. So, let's put us at this point. Audacity has shot down 7 Condors and sunk a submarine. She's a pretty useful asset. However, she has a habit of operating outside of the convoy because the Royal Navy are still working out how to use this, and despite them having learned in terms of fleet carrier operation that where the fleet carrier has to go to recover and operate aircraft, the fleet goes with the carrier to protect it. In the convoy, you have to remember there is very much the mentality the convoy merchant ships have to get through. This is one of the escorts. So when she has to go out of the convoy to do her business, then it's fine. You just let it, she goes. You're escorting the convoy. It's something which they have to learn, and they learn after this. At which point, one of the merchant vessels thinks they see a submarine. So they fire a snowflake flare, which is basically a big light. This reveals her very distinctive, because let's be honest, that's a pretty darn distinctive silhouette, to the Germans. And, well, as mentioned, the Germans have been given very specific orders to sink her, which they promptly do. U-751, under the command of Captain Lieutenant Gerhard Bergog, fires a torpedo, hits her engine room, and she begins to sink by the stern. Next two torpedoes cause an explosion in the aviation fuel, blowing off her bow. She sank. She took roughly 70 minutes to sink. 73 of her crew was killed. Her survivors were picked up by corvettes, Cornwallis, Marigold, and Penston. One, of course, survivors being Eric Winkle Brown, who goes on to become the world-famous test pilot, who probably flew more aircraft than anyone else will ever fly. Because, let's be honest, I don't see a period coming back where we're developing that many different humanly piloted aircraft a year again, as it was in the period when he was doing flight testing. And, well, happily, though, the Germans then did the British a favour, because they presumed what the British had been using was an illustrious class armoured carrier. So they put around, they'd sunk an illustrious class, which meant they then didn't expect an illustrious class to turn up elsewhere. And when they did, they presumed the British had built more illustrious class than they'd admitted, which just made the Royal Navy's life a lot even better. Fun times. Sea Dollars, I'm finding a lot of info on how to tan or pickle sheep pelts, but not anything on their uses. Yep, keep digging and digging. You'll find their uses. Enjoy Stafford. Have fun walking dogs. So, yeah, that's Audacity, the first escort carrier. Then comes along Archer. Pretty cute ship. Pretty cute ship. And they are good ships. This is the point. They are good ships. But the Convoy War does get interesting, and Archer here is a good example of an escort carrier. She's a good example of what they come along, and she's of course one of the first ones built by the Americans. She is a Long Island class in American terms, an Archer class in British terms. She is a conversion. Now, the thing about Archer is she serves with the Royal Navy till 1946. Her honours include the Atlantic, 43 to 44, and Bay of Biscay, 1944. She could carry 15. She has a lift, a catapult, 9 arrestor wires, and 3 barriers. So she is a mini carrier. Her standard patrol force is interesting. Her standard patrol force is interesting. As she starts out, again, she starts out with a heavy Martlet-focused force. But by 1942, she's delivering 12 Martlets to HMS Illustrious, and she's carrying 4 Swordfish herself. And she's sailing around in company with HMS Devonshire and 2 destroyers as part of Convoy AS2. One of the things the British do start doing is they start going, hang on, some of these destroyers are going to be, for convoys, are going to be escorts for the escort carrier. They're going to protect them. And that's what they need to do, because they really do need to protect them. King George VI actually visits HMS Archer at one point, and has a good time going around with her, with Admiral Lister, and both of them going, "Wow, this is everything in miniature, everything you need in miniature." Don't remember. I think there's also the issue that the Convoy Commodore was concentrating on getting the convoy to vaguely sail in the right direction, let alone turning. Yes, that is also a problem. But you must remember the convoy does zigzag anyway, so you've got them zigzagging, and then you've got the escort carrier going, I want to go this way, I want to go this way. And eventually they come with the idea of an operating box for the escort carrier that moves. Vigilant Martlet equals Grumman F4F Wildcat. Yep. Cut it. Pickled dock, sheep belt. Dock. I told you not to look it up. You don't have to look up what the pickled sheep belts are used for. I did not tell you, and I told you specifically not to Google what they were for. But Archer's cute. And again, there is something consistent coming out here. It's almost as if someone had been working this through. Because, let's see, what's she armed with? 3 4-inch guns, 4 twin and 7 single machine guns. This is in Archer. As well. Archer also carries 4 twin 20mm AA guns. In the U and 7 single 20mm guns. Again, the British put a lot of firepower added extra, etc. You know, they tried top speed 16.5 knots, range 14,550 nautical miles at 10 knots. There is a problem there if you think about it. If you are not able to, the faster a carrier is able to go, the less it needs to turn into the wind to launch aircraft, because you need a certain airspeed over the deck. Now, if you're talking about operating in the North Atlantic, or in the wide expanse of the Pacific, you probably have got the space to work up the full speed, and you've got possibly wind speed in the first place, that you can use to help you launch the aircraft. However, as we're getting into it a bit, there are circumstances in the world where you do not have the space, the maneuverability, or the wind in the first place to help you. And if you can only go 16.5 knots, whoo, that ain't good. I'll ask you, where do a complete flush deck carriers have their bridge, flight deck, or flight ops command facilities? Well, if you look at this little side spacing here, this sort of little structure built on the side of the flight deck, etc., that is the bridge and flyco, and also radar mast, and the other facilities are all down in the hull. Jaggeray, tell curious people not to look into something comedy. Well, no, you see, actually, it's also plausible deniability, because I told you not to look it up. I said you didn't need to look it up. You did not need to look up what pickled sheep pelts were used for. It's entirely up to you if you choose to ignore my advice. Amelia Barrow, would USS Wasp be a CV or CVL? Are we talking Wasp, the current LHD, or are we talking Wasp as in the vessel built prior to World War II? I think that's sort of more a CVL sort of thing. That's good. Is Archer a bow class hull? No. Archer is a conversion. They're merchant conversions. Basically, we don't get the bow, and I know the bow class are also merchant conversions, but they are sort of slightly different hulls used for them, I think. As I understand it. Long Island class, etc. And the bow and Archer were slightly different hulls. So he does microfiber towels and car seat covers? You wish. Right then, so this is what you have the cruising formation have got to by the time you get to PQ-18. And what you have to remember here, and I will point this out, in the version which is going up as long patrol, I did manage to forget the submarines. This is me. This is the trouble with having recorded this today and getting back into the reading my notes, because I hadn't actually read my notes the last 2 days because I had not been well. I had forgotten the submarines were actually in there. The submarines were trailing inside the convoy, ready to go out if there was a surface raider spotted. Because basically that's what the submarines are there for. Now, there is a couple of AA ships in this group. There is, of course, an escort carrier, and you'll notice there's a gap there. There's an escort carrier up there. There's a gap there. The oilers are in the back, hit and protected, either side. There are some rescue ships also in the back. There are a couple of submarines. I think there was actually more rescue ships than just the one, which is listed in this particular drawing, but it's quite a good drawing in other ways. And it details what the other ships were. And you have the various destroyers, etc. Now, please note, the back two destroyers are the two destroyers at the front of the back under air attack on the convoy would protect would close in to become part of the close protection for the convoy for its air defense. So you'd have about 8 of the destroyers pull in to various positions to protect the convoy and provide it with air defense on the sides and the sides and rear to provide it with better air defense against air attack. However, if the carrier needs to pull out of formation to launch his aircraft, well then, the two destroyers right at the back, they are the carrier escorts. Because if you've got a submarine coming up back, the trawlers, the minesweepers, etc. should be able to hold it off. I mean, I was thinking pre-World War II ship force. She's a little bit big to be called a CVL, but she's not really a practical CV. So she's sort of a CVFL for CV Fat Light. Or Fluffy Light in honor of the research assistants. Tiny Velica, Dodge Sea, is it true that a CV or Mac ship had its flight deck peeled back from the bow aft? Or is it just an invention for a novel? There is one which has a lot of damage during an Arctic storm, which is a Mac ship which does have its flight deck not quite peeled back, but damaged. But I think it's been accentuated for a novel, if I'm remembering correctly. No, second, yeah, that when then Dasher blows up, well, the aircraft didn't crash, did they? The aircraft carrier blew up, and where are those aircraft? Archer, Long Island class, and Bow class are converted C-3 type U.S. Maritime Commission cargo ships. Yeah, but what was it? I remember. No, they're all C-3 classification, if I remember correctly. Right. Yeah, the ones converted for Bow class were DWT, were C3 SA1s, 12,590 tons. But the Long Island ones were Sunship C3 ships, and they were different as well. So basically, you have the C3 as the broad type of cargo ship design, but there are variations within that design. So it's kind of like there are subclasses. So that's as I understood it. So Basically, to my mind, the Bow class are C3 SA1 DWTs 12595. The Sunships are slightly different. I forget which type they are. Are they eight? Hang on. Are they BRs or or they A's? Yeah, it's just there's a difference between them, and it's enough of a difference that I consider them different hulls because they're not quite. They are similar, but they're not the same. They're of the same class, but not the same classification, and different enough that yeah, it's different and produces different ships. Because that's why we call them the Bow class, not the Long Island class. Malachus Ferrosonium. Did seaplane carriers, did any escort the convoys? There is quite a list of them. However, you never hear of them in World War II. Mainly because they're actually out supporting seaplanes and floating planes and mobile bases for those ones. So, again, you can see a light cruiser sitting in this formation. Always nice to have one along, but it's probably an aviation light cruiser. And the AA ships are probably converted merchant ships loaded with AA guns. They're not going to be not going to be Dido class cruisers or anything like that. Yeah, but you do notice there is a gap in the formation, and then if we do to this one, it explains the gap. You also get to see exactly how the destroyers plot in, and you notice that there is two notes which have Avenger next to them, Avenger 1 and Avenger 2. That's because Avenger, the escort carrier, can slot into the convoy for protection at either position, depending on which one it's closer to, after it's gone back operating in this box area. You can see the box area slightly more clearly on this diagram, but it's also there on this one. And basically, that's how they get around the operation of the escort carrier. It dips behind and keeps going around. And then it can pop back in as it needs to. The two destroyers at the back are your carrier escorts. If anything happens to the carrier, they stick with the carrier. Also notice where there are destroyer leaders. They've put the destroyer leaders at the far edges. They put the destroyer leaders at the front. Destroyer leader can also, of course, mean tribal class destroyer, or occasionally mean large fleet destroyer or destroyer leader. So, there's an interesting one there. John Plain. So I've read a lot recently on new Japanese aircraft carriers being similar to escort carriers by displacement relatively. Would the Queen Elizabeth class be considered a light fleet carrier? There's an interesting scenario because full air group of the Queen Elizabeth class is about light fleet carrier standard, isn't it? Because whilst they're listed as strike aircraft, they're capable of carrying roughly 40 aircraft. So yeah, they are a fleet carrier, a light fleet carrier. 40 aircraft, that's roughly light fleet territory. But that's also theoretically illustrious class fleet carrier territory in World War at the beginning of World War II. So you can debate. That's why they're technically called a strike carrier. That's what the British call them. But yeah, I would say closer to a light fleet than a fleet, in my mind. But perfectly serviceable because of that. Okay, pretty sure Queen Elizabeth carriers count as supercarriers. Nope, not nuclear powered. Nuclear powered carriers are nuclear powered carriers of 100,000 plus tons are supercarriers. I know what various members of the paper and the press will say, but that doesn't make them it. It's kind of like the members of the press who call frigates battleships. Just calling them that doesn't make them a battleship. They're a frigate. And it's like people who call various battleships battle cruisers. No, they're a fast battleship. The fact that they don't have a big gun as big as you think they should have to be a battleship doesn't matter. That's the biggest gun that particular country can build at that time. If the biggest gun a country can build is an 11-inch gun, then that's the gun they fit to their battleship. Then if you turn around and say, well, that you've not built a battleship, you've built a battlecruiser because you've only fit an 11-inch gun, that doesn't really work. Same with the 13.5-inch gun of the French. We can argue about the King George V class, but no one ever really seems to do that. But even despite them having 14-inch guns, they're fun. They are fun. So, let's carry on. And that was of course from PQ-18. This of course Tayo, which is one of the first Japanese carriers built as converted into an escort carrier. Tayo's pretty darn critical to the Japanese war effort. She survives till 1944. The fact is, the Japanese have some escort carriers, they just don't have enough. They just don't have enough of anything to carry on a long war. Now, sorry, does it really matter if they're nuclear? They're similar to displacement to Kitty Hawks when Charles supercarriers. Kitty Hawks were supercarriers. But that was when the Kitty Hawks were around, which was a long time ago. Nowadays, it matters if they're nuclear or not. And it does matter. The Kitty Hawk class, and this is very far off the escort carrier front, but if you really want to have this argument, or rather this debate, I'm always happy to have a debate. It doesn't sound as good to say if you'd really rather have this debate, but we'll talk it through. So, the Kitty Hawk class were all out of service in 2009. They're in commission too. They were built in the 1960s. They are roughly 83,000 tons fully loaded. So when they were built, they were definitely supercarriers when they were built in the 1960s. And they were still used as it into the 1990s with various conversions. The trouble is, the British Queen Elizabeth class are 65,000 tons. So yeah, they are heavier than the Kitty Hawk when it's in light, but not heavier than it when it's in full load. They're less than it. And they're upper end for a light fleet carrier, I would agree. You could call them a fleet carrier, a light fleet carrier. But they're not a super carrier. They are not heavy enough. They do not carry a large enough air group. Kitty Hawk carried an up to 90 aircraft. Queen Elizabeth's carry up to 40. Kitty Hawks were 326 meters long overall. Queen Elizabeth class are 284 meters overall. The Kitty Hawks are lovely, but you give a Queen Elizabeth class carrier 40 more meters in length, and the ability to carry 40 more aircraft. And perhaps we'll be talking, well, maybe we need to redefine the definition of a supercarrier, because maybe she's close to it. But she's not. So she isn't. And I don't seem to remember having called a Chinese Type 003 a supercarrier either. And again, the French carrier is not big enough to be a supercarrier. I never said did I say it had to be nuclear, just nuclear, or did I say roughly 100,000 tons, roughly 90 aircraft, plus nuclear powered? Those are the criteria for a supercarrier. If you're not that, you're not a supercarrier. It's not just being nuclear, it's not just being heavy, it's not just carrying aircraft, it's all three for a modern supercarrier. And that's for a modern supercarrier. HMS Dreadnought in 1905 is a battleship. She weighs 20,000, roughly a little bit over 20,000 tons. She's a capable speed of 21 knots. And she has 12-inch guns. But would you want to call her a battleship and take her into a battleship versus battleship fight in 1945? No. Because the world changes. And the definitions move on. Ingenious Anne, how would a U-boat command react to a captain who prioritized sinking escort carriers while not attacking the supply ships before escaping? They'd be very happy to him. Okay, that's just silly, but we'll leave that to one side. Cav greater than the Queen Elizabeth class? No. Cav, now that is the Cav class are an interesting class, but definitely escort carrier level. And why do I say that? And this is coming as a fan of the Italian Navy, who's often talking about how great they are. Air group size. Air group size. It's always air group size. Their aircraft their capacity for hand capacity is 22 aircraft. With deck parking, they can do roughly 30. No, it's not better than the Queen Elizabeth class. And honestly, I would say also the Queen Elizabeth class is actually prettier than that one. Now, if you bring up the Trieste versus HMS Ocean, I'd probably be on the Trieste side. But no. Hello, IO2. Now, here's what happens when they close up for air defense in a convoy. And please note, the carrier is supposed to tuck itself and launch its fighters, if it can, and then tuck itself back into the convoy. And when they closed up, look at the ships which are sunk in PQ-18. If we go back to the earlier list, all those vessels there. We consider this one. Well, both tankers get through. Interestingly enough, one in the middle, but most of the merchant vessels which are sunk are the ones on the outside, and to an extent on the south are the ones closest to the air attacks. So the air attacks are mostly coming in from this direction and have mostly taken out these vessels. That's right. Supercarrier needs to carry 70 aircraft minimum. I would say 90. I don't think 70 aircraft makes you a supercarrier these days. I'm sorry. If you consider it, and this is the point I would say, is you've got to get to supercarrier, you need to get past fleet carrier, light fleet carrier, and escort carrier in terms of air group. Because otherwise, supercarrier just becomes another name for fleet carrier. So you're looking at something which is up to 24 aircraft is probably an escort carrier. Up to 48, 50 aircraft is probably a light carrier. Anything up to 72, maybe 80 aircraft, depending on how you want to write, sort of, well, yeah, how you want to consider it, is a fleet carrier. Above that level is when you're talking about a super carrier. And honestly, with a fleet carrier, you probably want to go further. You're probably looking not at 24, but you're probably looking at, well, if you are sensible, you take the light fleet carrier up to roughly 54 aircraft. So it goes up by 30. You take the fleet carrier then up to roughly you're probably talking about 80 to 86, and then the super carrier is above that. Look, what's the bottle collection in your right shoulder? That's iron brew bottles, which are going to be for a big bottle display on my left when I build it. That's my next project after I built the PC. USN doesn't even sell. That again, then doesn't normally even sell 90 airplane aircraft display. Then again, that is for peacetime deployments. Around 100 planes can be brought along on a Nimitz if needed. Pretty much, that's it. And I agree, no capes. We don't want to be sucked into aircraft engines. Yeah, but they still have space for 90 aircraft. That's the important thing, Peter Dawson. HMS Queen Elizabeth is often not going around the world with the full air group embarked. Full 40 aircraft are rarely going to be embarked. I wouldn't be surprised if she's normally tooling around the world with 18 to 24 F-35s and 8 to 12 Merlins. That's what they normally be wandering around with. Last bottles of a vintage age? Not really. But they are of the vintage version. Right. So, here are Biter and HMS Avenger. Yeah. They look good, don't they? They look cute. They certainly are cute and capable. They are very, very pretty ships. And that's worthwhile remembering, because some of these ships were cute and were pretty. Now, Biter and Avenger are, of course, both old merchant ships of the same class as Charger from the United States. So remember, United States takes delivery of Charger. Then they supply Dasher, Avenger, and Biter to the UK. Dasher, of course, has the accident, sinking on March 27th, 1943. But Avenger and Biter here, well, they go wandering around the world doing all sorts of interesting things. Took part in Convoy PQ-18 in, of course, the case of Avenger. And along with Biter is pictured here taking part in Operation Torch with Victorious. And, of course, Argus turns up as well for Operation Torch. It's always good to have them all on. I wonder how strike drones would change the 90 plane supercarrier counters. If UCAV can can up the effective strike power of carriers to equal that of a classic Super CV. It'll be interesting to see, but the thing is, how big are those drones going to get? Because what I've noticed is that if you want a more capable drone, the bigger it gets. And let's be honest, probably the best one I've seen operating from a carrier is the X-47. And that was it was a good drone, but that's also not that much smaller than a crewed aircraft. And whilst it was designed to be the most efficient utilization of space, being the flying wing shape, that's still going to require space in your ship. And that was from a supercarrier. So that's the other thing. Yes, you fit drones on your ship. That takes you up to 90 aircraft, but how many can the supercarrier, which has even more space, be able to fit along? Now, the thing is, I would say there is possibly something slightly problematic with this class, because if we consider Dasher goes down the way she does, but Avenger, well, she's torpedoed and sunk with a heavy loss of life in November 1942. She's struck by only one torpedo, and she sinks so quickly that only 12 members of her crew are rescued. She's just slightly west of Gibraltar. Now, this is a problem for a carrier, but for these merchant conversion, these ships. But if we consider again back to the tale of Audacity, she took 70 minutes to sink. That's a problem, really. That is a problem. And that is where you get sort of the various nicknames for escort carriers come from. Of course, the British have famously called them Walrus carriers. The US tried to get Baby Flat Top and Jeep Carrier to come along, but there are also names such as Combustible, Vulnerable, and Expendable, which come in because of the CV designation. It does affect things. Now, to answer the question in the chat, my question isn't how many drones you can fit, it's how many drones you can control. True, but it also is how many you can take with you and get into the combat range. Admittedly, there is always the point of can you 3D print drones and significant components of drones, in which case, does that mean you can basically carry infinite ones? It'd be interesting to see how that happens. That's what does meant to be special edition. Stupid auto cucumber. Oh well. Right. What were the internal subdivision like? Did a lack of their speed up of sinking? It was to an extent problematic for them. Do we know why Avenger sank so rapidly? Not really. There doesn't seem to be much. Well, let's put it this way. I haven't seen much in terms of an expedition to examine her hull. And I have looked to see if there has been any subsequent analysis and visits to there, and I haven't found any details of it, but I could have missed them. Because again, I was planning on doing quite a lot of research over the last few days, and I've spent quite a lot of the last few days going, show me to the blandest food possible. Now, the other point with PQ-18, which I should have mentioned, you will notice if you go to this one, you will see there is a cam ship. Now, cam ships are, of course, catapult aircraft merchant ships. So they've also got one of those with it to provide extra potential, another potential extra fighter just in case that convoy needed it. Useful. So, you now have convoys going on which have escort carriers and cam ships and MAC ships. Ronald Cash, Dr. Clarke, can you retrofit bulkheads or subdivision to merchant conversion hulls? You can, but it's going to be expensive, take up time, and cause you to have to redesign the entire hull, so you might as well start from new. Even if you have 3D printer, you still need to carry the material you use to print things out of. Yes. Sorry to hear that, Wayne. Or if they manage to sink the CV, then the cam ship and MAC ships are the backup. That's the other thing. If you have a MAC ship along, they didn't have a MAC ship there, which would have been more sensible, I think, to myself than a cam. But have a MAC ship, have a cam. They're all good backing up each other. So now it's time for the not convoy stuff, and the not convoy stuff is interesting because there are a few operations they get involved in. I have to admit, and I'm going to do something naughty, I am going to try and eat some food because if I don't have something, I think you could well be shortly listening to some very interesting Sonic performances. But I am with trepidation tucking in. So let's see, what have I got? Sorry. That should be okay. Fun times. Besides, it was hoped that the cam ship launched near shore, so cam pilots had a chance to land. True, but also at this point, the theoretical option, if you'd fitted up the cam aircraft correctly, it could potentially land on the escort carrier as well. Down treatment, I am not responding to that live on air. Not quite that bad, but it has been close. Considering the whole family's been unwell, there are two options. One is the ongoing issues we have, which could be another reaction to that, or my sister's cooking a chicken. So, the point is, if you are considered the USA built 155 aircraft carriers during World War II, of which 122 are escort carriers. The overwhelming vast majority of the flight decks you have which are viable and usable are escort carriers. How long do you think it is before someone has a bright idea and goes, hang on, this is a flight deck. We can use this for something else. I'm sure we can. I'm sure we can use this for something else. Someone always has a bright idea. Someone always has a bright idea. I'm not sure why, but there is always someone out there who goes, I have a bright idea. I would also like it to be noted that I find it objectionable that the film Operation Avalanche now ranks higher in a Google search than Operation Avalanche: The Actual Invasion of Italy. I think this is mildly insulting to the many, many thousands of soldiers involved. So I'm not sure why, but if anyone has any contacts at Google that can change that, it would be very good appreciated from a historian. Venture Vernon, escort carriers and other operations. Are we talking about a whole runaway business involving battleships heavier than the entire flotilla? Not just then, but there's a few other operations that get involved in. Code 85, how many beers are drunk? None of us drink. If you want real fun, take my mum out to lunch. She's allergic to tap water. It's always fun. I do. Then it sounds like then the good idea fairy popped up, and yes, Baldric and I have a bright idea, or I have a cunning plan. So let's start off with the Royal Navy Task Force 88 or Force V under Philip Vian at the Battle of Salerno. Now, remember, the Royal Navy had used escort carriers during Operation Torch, and it had gone swimmingly. Yay! Because Operation Torch is what we think about when we think about well-run carrier strike operations. But of course, there is one small thing about Operation Torch and the carriers operating from. Where were they operating from? Oh, mostly the Mediterranean. Oh, and the Atlantic. Okay, did they had large areas of water to operate around in? Yes, they could. And they were operating along with fleet carriers. All right. So, someone has a bright idea. And please note, I am still trying to work out what the last two destroyers in this group were. But, and this is despite the fact that the lovely Philip Vian has provided an entire chapter in his book about this command. Okay? There is an entire, from page 112 to 127, it is where he finds them. It even includes in here the line, at Cowes I met the WRNS for the first time and was thunderstruck by their versatility. Most of all, I was impressed by the Holy Wren boat crews, which operated a service in all the weathers between Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight. Really, Philip? Anyway, leaving that to one side, and his obsession with people driving him around in a boat, he does actually talk a lot about Salerno in here. And, well, let's talk about his task group. The fall of Mussolini on the 20th of July opened up, as it did, the possibility of an early surrender by Italy, induced the British Chiefs of Staff at a further conference in Quebec which took place in August, to agree to the principle of making do with what was available. At the same time, they insisted that one of the Eisenhower's prime necessities for the Operation Naval area was fighter cover over the beaches. Making do with what was available. What was available were escort carriers, not fleet carriers. They were all off joining the Indian Ocean and Pacific fleets. That's where Britain was sending them for. Yeah. The escort carriers weren't here, were they? They were going. What do you anything's here? The fleet carriers weren't going. Yeah. Sorry. The landing place selected, the Gulf of Salerno, 30 miles south of Naples, was just within range of Spitfires based on Sicily. They could only remain in the area for 20 minutes on each sortie. Consequently, only 9 fighters at a time would be provided, out of the numbers then available. The Admiralty therefore dispatched to the Mediterranean a force of 5 aircraft carriers: Unicorn, and Battler, Attacker, Hunter, and Stalker. Okay. We will leave those names out of it. They're all good naval names, but let's be honest. Battler, fine. But Attacker, Hunter, and Stalker, that wouldn't really pass inspection in today's PC world, would they? They sound like someone's idea of a bad night out, for starters. Problematic. Did anyone ever beach an escort carrier to make a runway on a landing site? No. Although, I'm surprised someone didn't. At the time of the and Stalker, it was to command these ships, together with the cruisers Euryalus, Scylla, and Charybdis, and then destroyers, that I was next appointed. I know there's no tribal class destroyers in this group. You know how I know? Because Vian, as a tribal commander, would have named them all. Other destroyers didn't matter to him after he got his tribals. I was altogether experienced in the operation of a force of aircraft carriers, but this efficiency was in part remedied by the unparalleled generosity of Rear Admiral Clement Moody, who lent me his own Chief of Staff officer. This was no less a man than Captain Guy Grantham, lately flag captain in Naid. Admiral Moody, a seasoned carrier commander, flew his flag at the time in Illustrious, which was a second fleet carrier, then formed part of Admiral Willis's battle force. This was the cover. This was to cover my ships from attack from seaward and to afford them air protection. Our own aircraft would be operating over the beaches and would not be available to protect the carriers from which they flew. Moody, who might well have been disappointed that the command of the in the shore force, carrier force, had not fallen to himself, was entirely unresentful and went to endless pains in helping Captain Grantham and me to produce a workable flying plan. The difficulty here was that, for necessary reasons, our force was allotted only a small sea area of Salerno from which to operate aircraft. The maximum speed of our Woolworth carriers was only 17 knots, and they must turn into the wind for flying aircraft off and on. The problem was how, with so little speed, and whilst remaining within our area, to have the ships back at leeward end in time for next flying operations. Let's put it this way. This is problematic, and means that Vian gets a lot of blame. But, hey-ho. Life happens. Early in September, an Anglo-American naval conference was arranged in Malta to enable the commanders of the several forces engaged in the operation to coordinate their plans. The commander-in-chief, who was then Algiers, said he would take me, and we duly set off in a Beaufighter. There were 5 in the aircraft, and we sat in tandem. Pilot, wireless operator, Rear Admiral Royal-Dick, Admiral Cunningham, and in the rear, myself. Shortly after taking off, I observed oil pouring from the cowling of the port engine. Leaning forward, I tapped the commander-in-chief smartly on the shoulder and directed his attention to what was happening. And he said, and did, nothing. Waiting a minute or two, I tapped him again and suggested, bawling in his ear, that he pass a report forward to pilot. He shook his head. The oil was still running out relentlessly, so I tried again, pointing out that the pilot seat was far in front of the engine cowling, and unless he looked over his shoulder, he would not be aware of the loss. I only got, He's the pilot. Leave him alone. He knows what he's doing. I thought to myself, that's just what he doesn't know, and tried to win the intercom, which did not work. Shortly afterwards, the aircraft banked steeply and force landed in the desert. The pilot, having noticed that its oil gauge was zero, the commander-in-chief's only comment was, "There you are, I told you. Two lucky men shouldn't travel in the same aircraft. They cancel each other out." That is where that famous comment from Andrew Cunningham of about Vian comes from. And this is the operation of Force V. By first light on the 9th of September, Force V was in the area allotted to us by Admiral Hewitt, which was 30 miles to seaward of Salerno. At 6:15 a.m., the first Seafire patrols were flown off, and for the remaining hours of daylight, sorties were sent up at hourly intervals, the fighters being able to remain for 80-minute patrols over the beaches. The operation of 5 carriers together was a novelty, as only of recent months had there been enough of them to form a squadron such as that in Force V. The control from a cruiser flagship was an experiment which proved successful, since the small escort carriers had very limited space on their bridges and for operation rooms. In the EOS, far from the noise of flying operations, we were able to give all our attention to manoeuvring the squadron and to controlling the aircraft in the air. These included fighters sent from Illustrious and Formidable, of the covering force, to give us protection whilst our own fighters looked after the landing area. Meanwhile, owing partly to the lack of any softening up bombardments, things were not going well ashore. Even on the northern British sector, where support fire by cruisers and destroyers was merely brought into play, fierce and determined opposition was met with, and progress was slow. The American sector, the assault bogged down on the beaches, where the troops were pinned by enemy artillery machine gun fire throughout the first day, suffering severely. So far as Force V was concerned, this meant that we had to operate for considerably longer than had been planned. It had been hoped to withdraw the carriers by the end of the second day, when Montecovino Airfield was expected to be in Allied hands. By the end of the 10th, however, it was still behind the enemy's lines, and so we prepared for another day's work. That's when he sends the famous message, "My carriers will stay here if we have to row back." By this time, our available fighters had greatly reduced in numbers, not primarily as a result of air combat, of which there had been a great deal of fewer than being expected, but owing to wastage from landing accidents. It had been almost calm, and since the carriers could not exceed 17 knots, the operation landing on their limited flight deck was an extremely skilled one. The aircraft, naval versions of the Spitfire, not basically designed for deck landing, lacked the necessary robustness and were easily damaged by anything but perfect landings. 40 aircraft were lost from the air group for this. There were 10 lost to enemy firing, a flak and enemy fighters. 40 were lost to damaging, mostly landings. Usually they pitch forward at the arrestor as the arrestor wires torn and damaging their propellers. Captain Henry McWilliam, commander under the escort carrier Hunter, proposed that 9 inches should be sawn off the propeller ends. Neither Grantham nor myself were aerodynamically sure of the soundness of this idea, but we had great faith in the technical knowledge of Captain McWilliam and authorised the operation, which was duly carried out. So far as we could see, the flight of the aircraft was not impaired, whilst the incidence of damage to propellers was greatly lessened. On the 11th of September, I reported the Force V had about shot its the bolt, but still there was no landing ground in the Allied hands, and orders were received to stick it out for another day. Meanwhile, American engineers had got to work constructing a landing strip near Paestum, the little town close behind the beaches in their sector, and by the 12th it was ready. And on Admiral Hewitt's orders, all our available Seafires, 26 of them, were sent to operate from it. Force V was then withdrawn, going first to Palermo and then to Bizin. 26 aircraft remained all this time. No tribals in the group, because if there had been, they might have attempted a landing themselves. Yes, well, they might. Well, Vian with a tribal under his command is well known to be a very dangerous prospect for anyone. Mm-hmm. 90 Amelia. Paestum has some really wonderful temples. Yes, it does. It's a nice place. Anyway, so then we have the Battle of Samar. And I was also going to do the Battle of Leyte Gulf, because, again, that's a whole lot of escort carriers assisting. And if you look at various amphibious operations, including Pacific Fleet and off the coasts of the Indian Ocean, those are all escort carriers doing those operations and providing those forts and supporting the troops ashore, because primarily the fleet carriers, as at Salerno, are being kept off to deal with fleet operations, while the escort carriers go in and provide the ongoing support for Marines ashore. This is a kind of interesting thing, because the Americans did retain facilities in their ships to better support that, in terms of the crew. The British had, of course, got rid of some of those facilities. Problematic, but dealt with. Vienna is given the travel flotillas rounded up with Polish forces to support landings. Next morning, they aren't in sight anywhere, though someone finds them making their way up the Tiber to Rome. Well, they'd get there. They'd probably have to do some management of the depth, but they manage away. So, Samar. Well, Samar is what happens when your covering fleet gets drawn away by various reports, and all that are left are the escort carrier groups of 7th Fleet. Basically, Halsey is lured by Zukaku. He wants to kill Zukaku, which is, of course, the last remaining carrier from the Pearl Harbor attack. And it's Yamamoto's led force which then descends upon these vessels. Now, there are Taffies 1, 2, and 3. Please note, there are 3 Taffies involved. Taffy 3 is the only one which is engaged in the surface action. Taffies 1 and 2 do provide aircraft, though, which come in and attack the love of the Japanese. Which is why you have 400 aircraft roughly involved in the battle. From attacking the Japanese fleet. Now, these ships do well. There are only 2 of them sunk. Okay? Now, that's mostly thanks to the destroyers and destroyer escorts charging in. The remaining 4 escort carriers, the remaining destroyer escorts are all damaged. But those 2 escort carriers which are sunk put up a fight. And what is one of the interesting things is, despite their nicknames of being combustible, vulnerable, and expendable, actually the armor-piercing shells, and even some of the high-explosive shells that the Japanese fire, actually go straight through them because they have no armor. It's kind of like all or nothing armoring, but we have nothing, so it just goes straight through us. It's brilliant. Half of all Americans lost in the total the wider battle of Leyte Gulf are killed in the Battle of Samar. It is devastating in losses, but it also illustrates the quality of the crews, because these ships are under attack. They're in a situation which they're not really supposed to be there for, and they still launch off strikes. They still launch off aircraft. They take the decision quickly to launch. It's more important that you get the aircraft in the air than you rearm them with their limited anti-ship weapons. Taffies 1 and 2 can take time to rearm aircraft, and they do. Taffy 3 launches everything it can get up there. And the thing to note about the aircraft is even when they run out of ammunition, they still keep diving in on the enemy. And this is one of the interesting things, because, of course, these are pilots who have had minimal training, really, in anti-ship warfare. Because they've been primarily doing land support of troops ashore, providing air defense patrols, those sort of things. Anti-ship hasn't been really something which they probably studied it and learnt it a bit when they were in training, but then since they've been deployed, what they've been doing is this. And they do it well. They do it really well. It's often, one of the things often put on the side is the fact that the Japanese lose 3 heavy cruisers sunk. 3 damaged. The battleships do not escape without damage. They lose 52 aircraft. No one are quite sure, because of the way they stacked it, how many they are lost. How many they lose. And Night Cigar Everyone has kindly jumped in and actually put one of the quotes which I had here to possibly read out in a bit in the chat. These fighters and dive bombers are armed for ground attack and anti-submarine duty. Their weapons are virtually useless against the giant Japanese ships. Yes and no, because the thing is, you can't maybe sink a ship with those weapons, but you can damage the top sides of it. You can damage radars. You can damage exposed implements and systems. You can damage radios. You can do damage to any crew which are above deck. And also, it's not that easy to fire at a target, especially at long range, at high speed, when you're also a bit under attack. You need to maneuver. You need to start acting, because you, reading the history books, know that those aircraft are not armed with anti-ship bombs. But how do the Japanese know they're not armed with the right kind of bombs? Do you really want to be the naval officer who goes, we don't need to worry about those dive bombers coming in, they're not armed with the right type of bombs? Do you want to take that chance? Do you want to go, I believe they are not armed with the right kind of bombs? Because also there is the fact that Taffy's 1 and 2's aircraft will turn up with the right kind of bombs. Ouch. An HE bomb can still cause a fire. Shocks from explosions can cause things to jam. You can destroy the AA positions, the secondary positions. The 2 most common classes of ships in terms of aircraft carriers built in World War II are the 45 ships of the Bow class and the 50 ships of the Casablanca class. That's good. Do you want to take that chance when you have liquid O2 powered torpedoes on your deck? No. And Spitron says the Japanese thought they'd run into Halsey's fleet. They thought that Taffy's 1 and 2 must be Halsey's fleet attacking them. That's where the aircraft must be coming from. Because again, you have all these aircraft coming and attacking you. And so, An aircraft which is dry, has no bombs left and no guns left, is diving in on you. And another aircraft which isn't dry is diving in on you at the same time. How do you know which one's firing at you? Are you sure when you're looking up on an aircraft, you can concentrate all your air defense on that aircraft because you're sure that aircraft doesn't have a bomb? Are you sure? Are you sure enough you won't divide your AA fire and therefore give that aircraft a better chance? That is the problem when they're in the Battle of Samar for the Japanese. Because the aircraft keep attacking, because the air crews keep attacking, because the ships keep fighting. They don't disintegrate. They don't fall apart. They don't immediately give up. They keep fighting. They are utter professionals. And think about that of these crews, because the vast majority of crew in an escort carrier are wartime service only. The vast majority of a crew in an escort carrier are not long-term personnel, full service personnel. And they put up a massive fight. It's an amazing action, but it's kind of what you expect of escort carriers by this point. Because escort carriers, as much as they are put down and ignored, are the vast majority of everything going on. I've got it written here. Of the 155 aircraft carriers built by the US during World War II, 122 were escort carriers. Run Cash, surely the Japanese would have been afraid a dry plane could do a kamikaze anyway. Yeah. That might go through their heads because, after all, this attack, they're launching their kamikazes. The Squad, are you also willing to turn your splinter shield away from an aircraft unloading 650 cals into your position? Yeah, that is... There are lots of problems. I do love the way there's now a conversation going about what happens if Taffy 3 had carried Swordfish. The fact is, the Avengers are a very good torpedo bomber. It is. But, as Verdun says, there is this one quirk of fate that if the Swordfish had been there, they'd have got a natural 20D and managed to actually torpedo the Yamato somehow, because it would just be the rules of fate and human history that if you had this most powerful ship in the world and actually had a Swordfish there, the Swordfish would somehow score that torpedo hit. What were the British numbers like? Well, the British built pretty much 6, because the Americans were churning out, so the British then concentrated on light fleet carriers and other things. That was Husky. Don't think the Japanese ships had centralized air command. Rather, they had a few guns around. Albert, I'm not sure where you're getting that information about the Japanese, but they did actually have very good controlled AA command. They had multiple guns around a single rangefinder. They did have radars at this time. They were getting information, and their crews were very, very well trained. The Japanese AA crews were not slouches and not bad. There is a lot of stuff said about Japanese, but really, most of it is, well, look at the quality of their ship's performance overall, and you soon realize they are just as equally well trained as their British and American counterparts. They have a problem in terms of numbers, and they have a problem in terms of technology, in that some of the choices, like the Zero. The Zero is a brilliant fighter on paper, because it's so fast, it's so nimble. But we all know from history that the problem is, because it's fast and nimble, it sacrificed protection and sturdiness, and you get a decent whack in and you're going to clobber it. And it's the same. Yes, it's got a long range capability, but yeah, that's not going to save it. It's one of the reasons why when we turn around and start talking about Task Force Z and what happens to it, and I usually say, well, if they'd had an aircraft carrier with them, they'd have survived. And people go, well, why? And I go, well, even if it had been an escort carrier, that would have survived. Why? Because if it had, let's see, in 1941, beginning 1941, if the British had an escort carrier at that time, it would probably have been armed with Fulmars or Hurricanes at best. And let's say it has Hurricanes aboard. Well, escort carrier would also have radar, etc. They've got Bettys coming in. As long as they can break up the strike, that's going to make things far more difficult for the Bettys, because if they aren't able to come in a coordinated group, if they're broken up into ones, well, that's easier for the capital ships to destroy. If they're ones and twos, it's easier for their anti-AA to actually keep on disrupting them and to make it easier for them to avoid a torpedo attack. And they're also going to coordinate with land-based aircraft and call them in. And there are land-based fighters. There are the... what are they called? There are the aircraft... I'm remembering this. I'll probably remember it when this is over. There are the Australian fighters ashore, which would have come out from Singapore. The fact is, escort carriers are incredibly useful. You needed them earlier in the war. You needed numbers of carriers earlier in the war. You needed those carriers not to be stopped building by Churchill in 1939, other fleet carriers and Unicorn, etc. And you need escort carriers earlier in the war. Again, it would have made a massive difference to all the forces employed. Alex Miller, wasn't Remoto the only ship big and else had coloured splashes? No, they all had rangefinders, but I think Yamato is the only one which has range-finding radar at this point, if I remember correctly. But they all have rangefinders, as in their visual rangefinders. So I was asking, don't worry, there's so much about the Japanese which goes out like that, and you sort of go, you sit there and go, look, if some of the stuff which comes out is just pure, for want of a better word, racism. That's it. In the nicest way, it's just racism. And it's a presumption they wouldn't have had that. And you sit there and go, well, the Italians had that, the British had that, the Germans had that, everyone else has that. So you're presuming the Japanese don't? Why? Because the Japanese are inherently stupid because they're Japanese? What is your assumption? And then you look at the Japanese ships and the Japanese systems and you go, well, yes, they do have a way of it. Just like the British and the Americans and the French and the Germans and the Italians, their system is slightly different and in form. It's Japanese style of it, but they've got the control. As Dirksquid points out, though, the Japanese airgun crews had lots of practice shooting at aircraft. Unfortunately for them, they were effectively armed with French interwar anti-tank gun in their air positions. Yes, the 37mm was not great. In fact, it's freaking terrible. We'll leave that to one side. Japan had the same problem as Poland had, lack of suitable engines. That's why Zero is so light and unprotected, and why Poland lacked modern fighters. Airframes are okay, but won't fly without engines. True. Buffaloes from the shore. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, my coach. It was Buffaloes. If Taffy 3 had been equipped for anti-ship, what damage could have been on? If they'd been... Let's put it this way. If by some magic they had been alerted that the Japanese were coming, and had known the Japanese were coming, and so had armed their aircraft with anti-ship and were maneuvering so that they were had put more space between them and the Japanese force. And Taffy 3, 2, and 1 had all combined their aircraft into an anti-ship attack. You could be talking about a far bigger loss rate of the Japanese, especially if those aircraft had managed to do alpha strike and coordinate it, which they theoretically could have done. Commander Cameron, Doc, with the American British planes being stronger, the pilots had a habit of ramming bits of them into aircraft or enemy bombers when they ran out of bullets. Not every day, but sometimes. It does depend on what aircraft you're in, whether you can actually do that. There are some which are strong enough that you can actually do this, but yeah. Hello, Robert Roberts. I'm getting paid to listen to great Battleship and Cruiser talk. Great afternoon for me. Enjoy. You were talking about 25mm. Yes. Where was I getting a 37mm from? Oh, that's the French one. Sorry. Sorry, I was getting my French and my anti aircraft gun and my British and my Japanese anti-aircraft gun millimeters confused because, of course, they both came from the French source. But yeah, 25mm. Oh, good lord, yeah. My problem is, could air cover got there in time to make a difference to 4C? Well, yes, it could, because if you have the carrier with them, you have your own air cover with you to make the difference initially, and you're calling in the Buffaloes. So, as it was in history, the Buffaloes getting there, if you call them straight away, if they'd realised they were available, possibly repulse. Possibly repulse. Not it's doubtful for Prince of Wales, but possibly repulse. They just break up the final attack on repulse enough that she doesn't get taken out. But if you have an escort carrier there, and let's say it's a standard escort carrier, let's go. What would be available in? Let's say what could be available in 1940. Let's go with HMS Avenger as our model of what they could have been available, because she's a good one to use as a basis one, because she's second generation. She carried 15 aircraft, a mixture of Fairey Swordfish and Hawker Sea Hurricanes, right? And usually it was roughly 6 and 9. 6 Hurricanes and 9 Swordfish. So let's say you have her in that order with them. What do the 6 Hurricanes do? Well, they're going up to break up the strikes. They're not trying to shoot down the aircraft. They're breaking up the strikes. And whilst they're doing that, there's the call going out. Now, there is always the chance that because of where they're going, they're not going for... it's not considered likely to get submarine. They split that round. And she's carrying 9 Hurricanes and 6 Swordfish. So she probably launches 3 Hurricanes, 3 more, and then 3 more. It would make a difference to operations. Let's put it this way. It would have made enough of a difference in my mind, especially until the Buffaloes turned up, that I think Prince of Wales would have been damaged. I doubt she would have been sunk. And I think Repulse would have survived, which would have changed things. If Repulse survives, she's likely to be out of action for months. If Repulse survives, she's likely to be on Australia out of action for months. But seeing as if she's not hit at all, which she hadn't been up until the final, then she might well not be out of action for months. But she could well need to be refitted. Tanavelica. Just the assumption the Japanese copied aircraft, they did take good ideas, got licenses developed for themselves. Yeah. Tanavelica, oh, that's from Josh Font. Tanavelica, Doxy. Drac always says the Japanese 25mm anti-aircraft gun was almost useless. What was wrong with it, and why didn't they put it right? To put it right, they'd have had to replace it with a 40mm. Honestly, the 25mm is just its accuracy. Basically, how to put it? They're going for the same formula as the pom-pom, but without the capabilities that make the pom-pom work. The pom-pom works. That's the point about the pom-pom. It's okay. The Bofors is an improvement over the pom-pom, but it's an improvement under certain aspects, which makes it more sensible. But if you were fighting, there's a reason why the British ships in the Mediterranean tend to hang on to the pom-pom longer than they do to convert to the Bofors. And the reason is because of the sheer volume of fire you can get up with a pom-pom, which allows you to deal with quick attacks. Whereas if you're dealing with attacks that you're detecting longer range and you've got space and time to deal with them, then the Bofors is the better weapon. The 25 doesn't have the range and doesn't have the hitting and stopping power of the Bofors, but it tries to do what the Bofors does, and it doesn't do it well. The dual-purpose 100mm gun, Type 98 gun, wasn't as good. It was good, but it didn't really work that as well for them. They didn't have enough of them, and they weren't able to really turn it out in large numbers. Plus, its mounting was difficult to fit to other ships and retroactively fit it to other ships. Does would Taffy 3 having a couple of battleships along with it change the battle overly much? Let's put it this way: if there had been battleships backing up the escort carriers, they'd have probably been the things sunk, or at least been deluged by torpedoes, and all the Japanese battleships would concentrate on them, so it would have stopped the carriers being sunk. Probably bought the carriers more time to launch their aircraft, but yeah, you'd probably be talking about a lot more people getting killed. Because a battleship is going to take down a lot more people than a CVE. Death Squad, 5-round, awkward to reload, closed magazine, just what is needed for a high rate of fire. It was fun. Disney Mitchell, get your patrons to turn up instead, since they do not believe they exist. That'd be fun. I presume you've just got to the thing of sending people to get my pay. No, I will go myself, suited and booted, and probably dose the eyeballs. Most part of the science, what was the Japanese view? Were they aware of the issues? Yes, they did look into the 40mm, but I think they did take some delivery from some German and Swedish options. But the point is, actually developing and actually building it would have taken a huge industrial capacity. And by the time in the war they realized they needed to change it, they didn't have the time. Honestly, the best time for them to do it would be look in 1940, look around and go, hang on, we need to make this change. Because they changed the factories in 1940. Yes, it might have been 3-4 months without production while they changed them over to 40mm. But they could have done it. And then, yeah, maybe not. Maybe they wouldn't have had a mass fitting by war beginning in 1941, but really it's 1942 onwards which they really need the improvement. And they could have had that in place by then. Given the RN lost Hood, Barham, Prince of Wales, and Ark Royal in 41, yeah, to be blunt, Repulse will be thrown back to the fight with no refit, as the RN don't have enough fast modern capital ships. My betting is if Repulse had survived, Renown would have gone out to join her, and it would have been the 2 R-class battlecruisers which would have been out there. And they would have probably given Repulse a mini refit. I.e., she'd have had her AA armament upgraded, and they'd have probably formed up her Repulse, Renown, with a couple of armoured carriers as a fast group. And that would be what Somerville would have been in charge of. as it was, when you lose repulse, you send out Warspite. And you have battleships, and that sort of slows down a group. It would have been interesting to see what would happen if you did have Repulse and Renown and two carriers as your sort of fast group as you center of the Indian Ocean Fleet. It would be interesting to see what happens. Anyway, Roland Cash's Indian commanding officer is telling him it's bedtime. I have to admit, my stomach is telling me I'm hungry, and my fluffy research assistants are sending me pictures of pizzas. So I'm going to say thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much for all your super chats and all your sort of support. It really wouldn't be possible to do anything I'm doing without it. Trust me. This computer which has arrived would nowhere near be here without your support. The research trip I'm hoping to do in November would definitely not be able to be pulled off without your support. And frankly, thank you, because it's scary sometimes. But without you, it really wouldn't be getting anywhere like that I am doing. Anyway, I'm going to answer the last few questions, and then I'm going to say good night. Next week, we have the Brooklyn class. On Sunday, not only will I be announcing which Seneca Nero, the new computer, if all the stuff's arrived, then that will be Sunday. If not, that will hopefully be Thursday. But I have been told some of the stuff might not get here till the 8th of October, but I'm crossing fingers. Take care, Wayneswell. Thank you, IO2, Bichon. Thank you, Bichon, Seneca Nero. Thank you, Peter Dawson. Thank you, Cody85. Thank you, Michael Cooch. Thank you, Krista Ryan. Have you picked a chapter color scheme for your Marines? Yes, I do have a chapter and color scheme for my Marines. I'm going for Iron Walls, as the rest of my family don't have those. So, yeah, that's going to be that's the project after I've got everything else done, and then I've said I will open up a models channel on the Discord once I've got them and got them sorted out. Glad you'll be there, Knights of Kofran. Thank you, Dan Freeman. Thank you, Alex Miller. Circle of Doom. Hopefully it's working. Roger, without us, you'd be a panicking banker in the city right now. No, I'd be a panicking analyst in the analyst banker in the city right now. Although probably not panicking that much, knowing me. I'm one of those people who lives very simply, so I have a feeling whatever I did, I would be stocking stuff away. Nice hearing. Is there any truth to heard of the Captain of H's victory at the time when Horatio Nelson died in Battle of Trafalgar? Laser ordered the ship to be broken up. Then he told his wife and she threatened to put him in doghouse. No. No. But his wife would have, Captain Hardy's wife would have put him in doghouse, but no. That's just one of those stories that goes around. Take care, everyone. Thank you for watching, and take care. Have fun. Right, and let's check that's all okay before I end this. Thank you, Rob Smith. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Take care, and have fun. Thank you, Malaga.